thank you to the Lantern team for helping us put this content together. We got some great content about managing, governing, and securing Microsoft Fabric. So we'll do a couple of slides, we'll do a couple of polls, and you will also go into the demo of the product and some of its offering as well. So quick introduction. My name is Raja Manzoor. I work for Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft for about 9 years, but I've been doing BI and business intelligence for about 15 years. Greg, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, Greg Galloway, been with Lantern forever. I'm a principal and part of our leadership team in our Dallas studio. I've been working with Fabric all the way since it wasn't called Fabric in private preview, and write about Fabric quite a bit on LinkedIn. Daniel?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Daniel Brown. I'm the BI practice lead here at Lantern. I've been here for about 6 years. I have a heavy focus on Power BI and now Fabric, so really looking forward to this discussion today.
Awesome. All right, so team, the agenda today, I see a lot of people who join. Some of you I already work with, and I know the maturity and understanding of Fabric is different for a lot of customers. So we thought what we're going to do is we're going to give you a quick introduction to Fabric, a quick overview, so that everybody knows what Fabric is. If you haven't heard about it, we'll give you a quick overview. I will also show you the experiences actually in Power BI, and then we'll talk more deeper into managing, governing, and securing aspect of it. We'll do a couple of polls as well, and plus we'll have a question and answers session in the end as well. So the poll question, and this is important as we try to bring you more content. So how would you rate your familiarity with Fabric? Yeah, do help us understand. I think there's a lot of opportunity for skilling up on Fabric and learning and getting real value out of this technology. So let us know where you stand so that as we curate topics, we bring you more into this one-to-many fashion. If we have better understanding, we'll definitely bring you more content that tailors to your needs. Okay, so it looks like more than half folks are really new to Fabric. So that means I'm gonna go a little bit slower. So apologies for folks who are a little bit more advanced right now. That might be a little bit repeat, but I think you will still get a lot out of this this call. All right. So let's talk about Fabric. So and I'm gonna go due to technical difficulties. I think we're running about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes behind. So I'm gonna go really quickly over the slide. And in later polls, we'll ask for more questions. So we'll go deeper and bring you more content that goes deeper into areas you're interested in. But Microsoft Fabric is an analytics offering from Microsoft. If you guys are familiar with Power BI, started as a visualization tool, then it grew up with Power BI Premium, and you can start doing tabular model. But outside that, if you wanted to do more, you need Data Factory for ETL. You need data lakes kind of storage that wasn't available in a SaaS environment. Your data science personas, if you had real-time use cases, some of that was not available. So what Fabric does is it brings all of those experience in one place in a SaaS environment, in that SaaS experience. It is based on a lake house architecture. We'll talk about that as well. And it brings the same kind of security that you're used to with Microsoft. And we'll talk about security in the later topic as well. So just a big overview of Fabric is high level overview, SaaS environment. Brings all of that Microsoft technologies that's used to build your data pipeline, from ingestion to storage to to the analytics portion, all of that in one. Plus, it brings a lot more with bringing in Spark experience for your data engineering workloads as well. And one of the biggest thing, especially for my Power BI practitioners, is as we were looking been working with Power BI in the past, few years, there's been really two design patterns. You had the direct query mode, which was it had its problems with performance, but that gave you the real-time data. And the second, design pattern has been around importing your data into Power BI, which, obviously comes with some latency. Your data, we're making copies of your data. We ran into some size restrictions, but it was very performant. But those were the two options we really had for a lot of our workload. I think what we're really excited about is this direct lake mode, which is kind of combination or best of the two worlds, and where you can bring in a lot more data and you can have more real-time analytics, but it's still performant. And so as you guys think about Fabric, it obviously offers a lot more on the data engineering, data science side. But I think if you are making this jump from Power BI to Fabric, which I know a lot of my customers are, this is going to open a very important design pattern for you, which we've been struggling with in the past few years, which is a lot more data in the lake, in your data lake, that is extended to your front-end analytics, and your business users can analyze that data, use it in Excel, use it in Power BI report, for data explorations and data insights. So that's a great one of the great features that I'm really excited about. And I think as you guys are thinking about adopting Fabric, I think that might be a really good start to start exploring direct lake mode in Fabric. Okay. With that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly share my screen. I want to show you the Fabric experience as well, and not just talk about it. So again, this is going to be a quick overview. We're not going to go into detail. Greg, can you give me a thumbs up when you can actually see my screen?
All good.
Got it. All right. So if you guys are familiar with Power BI, so if I go into powerbi.com, and some of my features might be in preview, so you might not get everything that I see, but you're going to get most of it. If you go to powerbi.com, on the bottom part of your screen, you're going to see this Power BI icon. And this is where your Fabric items are going to be. So if I click on it, it opens up all these experiences that you get into Fabric that you were not able to get into in Power BI. So if I click on it, you will see, familiar Power BI experience with your workspaces, your data sets, your semantic models, your reports, your dashboards. You get Data Factory here for your ETL, 150 plus connectors available to do your ETL job. There's a new feature here called Data Activator to monitor data, build triggers on it. One of the very popular one is the Synapse Data Engineering. So if you click on that Synapse Data Engineering, you can actually create your own lakehouse without setting up any infrastructure. You can create your lakehouse, and there's a few ways where you can ingest data into this lakehouse and then have that available for building semantic model or just querying data through SQL. Notebook experience, which was not available before in Power BI, it's available here in inside Fabric. So if you're more familiar with writing code through Notebook rather than drag and experience in Power BI, I think you're gonna get a lot of benefit out of that. So data engineering, there's data science, data warehouse, real-time analytics. So I'm not going to go deep into any one of these, but all of these features are now, going to powerbi.com. If you have Fabric licenses, you can actually go and start building on these experiences. Another thing I want to show you guys really quickly is if I go back here, we're talking about managing and governance a lot today. If you go here, you're going to see something called a monitoring hub, which is going to give you the list of activities that you're running on Fabric, and this is actually kind of helping you track if you want to stop something, if you want to see how it's performing, if it's succeeded, it's failure, just a stated update on it. You can also look at historical runs on all the things that are running in there. So Monitoring Hub is going to be very important if you want to understand, hey, how long does it take me to bring this data into Power BI? I think this is going to be a really important part of how you manage your workloads in Fabric. So just wanted to give you a quick overview of that. Um, Another thing that you're going to get with Fabric is called admin monitoring. So a lot of questions about, monitoring experience. And, we've had some struggles with Power BI as well. This is where, if you want to look at feature usage and adoption, I think this is a great place to go. You can actually go into admin monitoring. There's reports in there. You can use a semantic model to build your own report. And this is where you can really analyze what is going on inside your capacity. What are some of the features that are being used? Are people building data warehouses? Is it more reporting? And there's other stuff coming into it. Stay tuned. There's some stuff that is still in private preview, which will help you understand if there's any oversharing. So I think from a governance standpoint, in later sessions, we might give you a little bit more detail on this, but really good stuff coming off in admin monitoring. The capacity metrics app, which is about how your capacity is being utilized, which is today outside the monitoring hub. You have to download an app and then monitor your capacity. I think that will be also part of this monitoring hub. So monitoring hub will give you most of what you need to kind of look at how your capacity, is it healthy, what artifacts are running on it, how it's being adopted. All right, cool. The last thing I want to talk about, and apologize for running late because I know we're kind of over time here. How do you set up your capacity? So in the past, Power BI Premium, you would set it up with you would buy it through Power BI licensing, and you just buy a server in the cloud, and then you just have prepaid. But with Fabric, you can actually go to Azure and you can create a capacity here. Great thing about this is you can actually pause your capacity. So think about it. If you have idle times, instead of paying for a server, which there's an option of buying a reserve capacity. But the great thing about Fabric is if your workload is not running, you can pause it, and that can save you some cost. Plus, you can also change size of the capacity. So if you're running some test workloads, that's a great scenario where you don't need a bigger capacity. You might need a bigger capacity to just run some workloads, and then you want to scale down. So this will give you some really good options for scalability. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Greg and Daniel. Hope this was helpful, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Raja.
So there was a question in the chat. So Greg or Raja, maybe you can take a look at that. And if not, we can talk about it at the end. So now what we want to get into is the manage section of today's discussion, and kind of a perfect transition from what Raja just kind of talked about. As you can see, all those features and functionalities right there within the service. Fabric kind of being the parent now, and Power BI being one of the children. So we wanted to level set a little bit of the difference between P SKUs, which a lot on the call might have today, and the F SKUs. And so kind of right off the bat, just want to make sure it's clear that a majority of the Fabric features are available to you today with your P SKUs. We'll talk about a small subset of features that are P or F SKU specific, but majority of things you can start leveraging today. And some other key differences here is the P SKUs are kind of purchased through Microsoft Office. You have auto scale ability. Some of y'all might be leveraging that today. And then the P SKU is being retired in the next year, right? Which might be, a big reason why everybody's kind of on the call today, is to get some clarity on what does this mean for you. So when we start talking F SKUs, you get a lot more flexibility in the size capacities that you can get. So it goes all the way from an F2 to an F2048. For some comparison, the F64 is equivalent to the P1s on the Power BI side. These capacities are purchased in Azure. Some of the difference here, auto scale is just a roadmap feature right now, so you don't have that auto scale feature inside the F SKUs yet. but you do have flexibility in your ability to scale up or scale down your capacities inside of Azure, along with abilities to pause and restart. And then we'll talk in a little more detail about some of the flexibility that the larger range of SKUs can provide and how you kind of set up your workloads. And then a couple key feature callouts is on the F SKUs, and we'll go into detail. Greg will go into detail later. But on F64 and higher, you get a feature called Trusted Workspaces and Manage Private Endpoints. And then similar to the P1 and up, on the F64 and higher, you get the unlimited viewers, the report consumers that don't need pro licenses. So next, kind of continuing on that topic of the differences here. So if you're a tenant admin, definitely take a look if you haven't at your tenant settings. There's several that are Fabric specific, all in preview right now. One that I wanted to call out is the users being able to create Fabric items. So if you're still, kind of figuring out how are we going to leverage these features and functionalities in the broader Fabric ecosystem, you can kind of assign that ability to create Fabric items to specific groups. If you're working on POCs or testing out certain features and functionalities, know that capability on limiting the broader group to start using Fabric, you can specify specific groups to be able to leverage it. And then when we talk capacities, main difference here, all the settings are really the same. The main difference is on the P SKUs, you have that ability to manage your auto scale. And on the F SKUs, it's not there today. But other than that, all your capacity settings are the same between the two. So next, what we want to talk about is the flexibility. Flexibility of these capacities. So let's walk through a couple scenarios. So one being you set up your workspaces, your workloads in kind of a dev, test, prod type scenario. Today with your P SKUs, you might have all three of them sitting on the same P SKU. If you separate out your workloads, you might have them, three separate P SKUs to run your dev, test, and prod. You have a little bit more flexibility now with your SKU sizes. So in this scenario, you can see on the dev workspace, we have a much smaller capacity being leveraged, an F4 on our capacity A there. And then we get into a test scenario. Maybe we need to load a little bit more data. So the volume is a little bit higher. So we go up to an F16 with its own unique capacity B there. And then on the production side, your capacity C being an F64, maybe in this scenario, you need the unlimited consumers of reports to have the ability to come in and view content. And so you can see kind of the flexibility here on leveraging various size capacities across different workloads. And the next one, we wanted to just kind of make sure it's clear that you don't have to follow that exact pattern. You can use the same capacity across workspaces, just like you do with your P SKUs today. And we'll get into a demo here in a little bit on how that assignment to a workspace works with the Fabric SKUs. But in this scenario, you can see dev and test are leveraging the same capacity, and then we bump up to that larger capacity of an F64 for the production scenario. So a couple ways we can leverage these things. The last is one to call out the ability to separate out critical workloads, right? So you might have some critical ETL. You might start to develop Fabric Data Factory pipelines and warehouses and notebooks to help with your ETL layer. So that can sit on its own capacity. We'll talk a little bit more detail later on this concept of shortcuts, but you can shortcut data over to another workspace where it's just a pointer, and your business groups can have their own capacity. So this is your ability to kind of separate out if you have some self-service, but you want to separate out these workloads because you don't want necessarily all these business groups working on the same capacity that your critical ETL is on. You have that flexibility to separate it and to use different capacity sizes.
Great. So real quick demo here, just showing you in workspace settings how you can move a workspace between different capacities. So for example, if this workspace were already assigned to a P SKU, your premium capacity, then you could change it. In this case, we're moving it from a trial to an F SKU or a fabric capacity in our Azure subscriptions. And it's just as simple as that, moving a workspace. So as we turn a little bit from capacities to more what you can do in Fabric and the different approaches to data architectures, here are three pretty common ones that we've seen work well in Fabric, and I'll talk about the differences in a bit. So the first option is more of a medallion architecture. It organizes data into three zones: bronze, silver, and gold. So bronze is really you're ingesting your data in the format that it's in. So CSVs would be landed just like that. If you're pulling from some SQL source, then you might land it as Parquet files to really maintain that schema. But the goal is to land it untransformed. Then in Silver, you'll start to make sure you've got common keys and maybe fixed data types and such. That'll be in Delta Lake format, Delta Parquet files. And then in your gold zone, you'll load it into a dimensional model, fact tables, and dimensions. And as you can see in this diagram, in the Lakehouse medallion architecture, data architecture, you're using Spark Notebook, so primarily Python or maybe Spark SQL to do all the transformation. So the next common data architecture is really around a cloud data warehousing pattern. You'll get your data from your sources and land it in the staging database, and then you'll do your transformations with T-SQL stored procedures and land it into your presentation database, into your dimensional model, fact tables, and dimensions. The third option here is something that Fabric definitely supports. So if your organization is really a bit more decentralized, where you have almost like a mini IT org in each of your departments, and you want to independently maintain and make these architecture decisions, then you can do that. So for example, in the diagram, your marketing department has chosen a more of a warehouse style, and then in your operations department, something similar. But maybe the finance department wants to do more of a medallion architecture with lake houses and Spark notebooks. And then you can share the data back with data contracts with each other using shortcuts. So those are a couple of common architectures. Daniel talked about really organizing your workspaces and assigning them to capacities. But now that we've chosen a data architecture, in this case, we'll say the medallion architecture, how do we organize that into one or more workspaces? So in this example, our organization might really have a group of data engineers that's responsible for getting and landing and transforming the data into a medallion architecture, and then building out the relationships and the common calculations in that shared semantic model. So that might be in one workspace. We'll call that maybe Enterprise Data Lake Dev. Then we've got a couple of other teams of people that are really just visualizing the data, and so they'll put these thin reports sitting on top of that shared data model in separate workspaces that they're responsible for, maybe focused on the finance department and the sales department. Then in order to promote all this to a higher environment, we'll use the deployment pipelines feature, which is rolling out and starting to support all the different Fabric features. So that deployment pipeline will get things deployed into your test environment. It'll get it deployed into your production environment, and kind of optionally, you can hook all this in with Azure DevOps pipelines if that's of interest, or you can just use the UI that's in Fabric. We've put together a couple of really quick wins that we think are great places to get started with Fabric. So these might be great POC opportunities, or really ways to get good value out of Fabric and start using it. So the first one is all around integrating existing large Power BI models and allowing other Fabric features to take advantage of that data. So let's say that we've built a really large import model. It's got a bunch of really complex Power Queries that source from SQL and other databases and maybe files in SharePoint. And the business is finding it incredibly valuable. They're using the Power BI report a lot, but there are other groups within your company that really want to take advantage of this. For example, let's say maybe you have some data scientists who want to use this same data. Well, there's a really interesting feature that's real quick to turn on that integrates the data and writes it out to OneLake every time you refresh the model. And so once you've done that, then now your data scientists can spin up a Fabric notebook and use Python and do their data sciencey things and leverage and get value out of that data. So here's a quick demo of that. We'll open up the data model for this large semantic model in the browser and show that it's got a bunch of tables and such. It's even got some DAX calculated tables here. And so we want to export this out into OneLake and use it more broadly. So we'll go into the settings for this semantic model. We'll scroll down to the section that's labeled OneLake integration. I've already got it turned on, but this is what you would need to turn on. And after you've turned it on, you'll need to do a refresh at least once to start writing out to OneLake. And at that point, you can start using it. To make it more convenient, I'll show you how we can expose this data through a shortcut in a lakehouse. And that's really just for convenience. You could point at it directly in your notebook, as I'll show. So I'll choose a OneLake shortcut. I'll choose my semantic model there, and I'll pick the tables that I want to expose in my lakehouse via shortcuts. And so once that's done, you'll get a chance to kind of preview the data within your lakehouse. You can look at it in terms of SQL column types, and then you can really make use of it in a wide variety of Fabric features. So next, I'll show you a Spark notebook. So as you see on the first cell there, line 2 is just referring to that folder in OneLake that houses the semantic file, semantic model. Or it's a little bit quicker to just refer to it within your lakehouse where we've done the shortcuts. That's line 3. So in the first cell here, we're loading that table that's in Delta Lake format into a Spark data frame. That'll feel familiar for your data scientists. Then we'll start doing some profiling on it. Like, for example, we'll do some analysis on the string columns to see which ones have nulls. Those second 2 columns there seem to have a lot of nulls. We'll do some correlation analysis. So promotion key and currency key are not at all correlated, but in this data set, freight and extended amount are. And then we'll run a Spark SQL statement to do some analysis on it. So really, you're able to quickly get your data scientists to be productive on this data set that you've really invested in loading into your import model. So that's one quick win. The next quick win is all around version control, and Fabric integrates with Azure DevOps. So imagine that you have dozens of workspaces in production, and really nobody within your organization is really sure where the Power BI desktop file lives that is the same as what's in production. And also, on some of your workspaces, you've used features which prevent you from downloading the Power BI desktop file from the service. Like, for example, you've turned on incremental refresh, and that blocks downloading a PBIX. Or maybe last week, a report broke, and you're really not sure who changed what. So version control can really help you with all these circumstances, all these pain points. So we'll go into Workspace Settings, and under the Get Integration tab, we'll choose a particular Azure DevOps organization and project and repo. We'll pick a branch. And as soon as we click Connect and Sync, it's going to take these artifacts and push them into Azure DevOps so that we'll start capturing version control. You'll see here in Azure DevOps, I've refreshed, and I'll show you what it looks like now you see the notebook source code for the notebook we showed in the prior demo. So now we've got version control activated. I'll edit this semantic model in the browser, and I'll add a measure, and then we'll show you how that changes things. We could certainly do it in the browser like we're showing here, or you can clone the repo from Azure DevOps down to your laptop and open up the semantic models in Power BI Desktop, and then push those changes back up to Azure DevOps. It all works really seamlessly. But this is just to show you how we can use version control to see who changed what. So I've made one change. I'll add a comment to my commit, and now we're pushing the changed pieces back to Azure DevOps. Now, if I look at my history, you can see this commit that I just made, and you can see really clearly who added this customer account measure or changed something that broke a report. That's a real quick tour of the Azure DevOps integration inside of Microsoft Fabric. The third quick win we want to talk about is around mirroring. So let's set up this situation by saying you have a really important transactional database that powers your line of business applications, and it's really busy. It's overloaded. You've got a bunch of operational reports that are in direct query mode, firing off lots of SQL queries throughout the day. You've got large import models that are refreshing multiple times a day and really hammering that database. You've got data integration, so data factory pipelines that are pulling information out of your Azure SQL database and then loading it downstream to a warehouse. So Microsoft Fabric has a feature called mirroring, which can really solve some of these pain points here. So as I'll show you in a demo in just a second, you can turn on mirroring of your Azure SQL database, and then in near real time, it will write that data to Fabric and make it available for all these downstream Fabric workloads, like building reports on it, even in direct lake mode, like cross-database joins to load into your downstream warehouse. So that's taken a tremendous amount of load off of our Azure SQL database and really solved that pain point. So I'll show you a demo of what it's like to turn on mirroring. It's pretty simple. We'll go to the new and we'll choose mirrored Azure SQL database. We'll give it a name, and then next it'll ask us for connection information. So we'll choose the right connection information for this Azure SQL database, and we'll click next. We'll get to choose which tables, if not all, we want to mirror. It'll mirror over all the tables that have primary keys, since it's doing it incrementally and needs that primary key. Then we'll get to a monitoring experience here where we can monitor the status of our application and give it a refresh to make sure that it's caught up or whatever. It's going to mirror that once and then also continue to mirror it incrementally going forward in near real time. Now we've flipped over to the SQL endpoint here for our mirrored database, and we can see a preview of what that data looks like. We could start building a Power BI report on it in direct lake mode, where it's just sitting directly on the files in one lake. So that's offloaded quite a bit of activity from our transactional database. The fourth quick win is around direct lake, and I'm glad Raja described that at the beginning. So hopefully you've got a good idea of what this looks like. Let's say that your organization has invested pretty heavily in an Azure Databricks implementation, and you've got your medallion architecture, bronze, silver, gold. You've got Azure Databricks notebooks that are loading this architecture. Your data is sitting in Delta Lake format, which is the common format that's used in Microsoft Fabric amongst all compute engines. And then you've got this multiple times a day, 30-minute semantic model, import model refresh, which is a bit of a pain because you have to pay for the Databricks compute for this, and your users have to wait 30 minutes before they get fresh data. So how can we solve that pain point? Well, one really quick way to do that in Fabric is to use a shortcut so that the data from your gold zone shows up in your Fabric Lakehouse through shortcuts. And then you can build a direct lake semantic model on top of that, which, as Raja describes, is basically Power BI sitting directly on top of the Delta Lake tables in your one lake or in your shortcuts. And so there's not that 30-minute import model refresh time anymore, and your users get access to the data much quicker, and the performance is still almost exactly the same as import model performance. So pain point solved there. Over time, what you might also want to do is have Databricks actually write the data to OneLake as you really centralize your data platform inside of Microsoft Fabric. And also you're paying for Fabric capacity, and if you have some headroom, you might think of how else you could make good use of it. Like for example, if you were paying separately for Azure Data Factory pipelines, you might move those into Fabric Data Factory pipelines that all runs on the same capacity. So there are 4 quick wins that we think are great ways to get started in Fabric and get some value out of it real quickly. And I'll turn it over to Daniel as we start talking more about governance.
Perfect. So yeah, so when we start to think about governance, we really start to think about people and process, right? And so what we wanted to do is talk through a couple delivery approaches here. So you see the business led kind of bottom up approach, kind of a blended approach with the IT managed, and then the approach that's IT owned, more of a top down. And so we're going to get into each of these in a little bit more detail. Kind of talk about them from the perspective of now we have a lot more items and things to manage and govern when we talk about Fabric beyond just what we're used to in the Power BI landscape. So when we talk business-led self-service, right, this is where the business really supports all elements of the solution. So when we talk about Fabric, this would be owning, if they wanted to build a warehouse, if they wanted to build pipelines, build their own semantic models and their own reporting. They're the owners of that, right? And really the IT or the administration of the platform is the only thing that kind of sits maybe with a centralized team from a tenant perspective. Then we get into the IT managed. So this is the blended approach, and this is kind of where your dividing line can kind of hit a couple different places. And so here in this example, you see the ownership. IT kind of owns the data and semantic layer. So think again about these new Fabric items that even Greg and Raja have already shared about. This would sit within like an IT team or a BI team to build warehouses, lake houses that might go through a little bit more of a rigorous process to validate and certify the data that's coming through those. And the business would own the reporting layer. Now your dividing line could also be that you let the business has the skills and capabilities and you want them to handle their own semantic modeling. So the IT handles everything up through a warehouse or a lake house and then allows the business to build their own models, maybe create shortcuts so you're not copying data around and then build their own reports. So within this one, it's, there definitely has to be a discussion around where's the dividing line between what the IT or centralized teams are managing and what capabilities are you putting in the hands of business groups and analysts on the self-service side. Then we talk IT owned. So this is where that centralized team is owning all elements of the solution, and really the business is consumers of published reports that are coming. Certified reports that again have gone through probably a more rigorous governance process than what comes out of a self-service process. And so, it's not a one size fits all, right? When we talk about governance and we talk about these approaches, so it's important to kind of begin to define what solutions and what kind of scenarios do various delivery approaches make sense, right? Because you could have multiple of these at play for different analytic solutions and BI solutions, and it's fluid. So when we get to the next slide, this can be a fluid process, right? Where something might start in the self-service space, but it becomes critical over time. It becomes a critical report to the organization. The maintenance of it and keeping it up to date becomes more critical because people are making, maybe more people across the organization are making key decisions off of it. And so there might be a point where that ownership transfers over. It doesn't become quite as much of a self-service kind of solution, and it transfers over to an IT-owned solution in order to kind of put it through the right processes to get it kind of certified and in a place where it's always up and running in the proper ways. So next thing we want to talk about when we talk governance is our roles, right? What are the roles and kind of responsibilities? And we wanted to first start familiar, right, within Power BI. So the kind of 4 key roles that we always identify when we talk about Power BI is first the Power BI champion. So this is somebody that's more in the business, that have become technical around Power BI, that have become evangelizers of the tool within their group, that you bring in closer to the administration team and start to work with them to understand the right processes, the right policies. What are the best practices that are trying to be implemented in order to have efficient capacity usage. And so they become the champions back into the business group and can help educate. And if there's changes in policies and procedures and best practices, they can be a great throughput into the business groups. And you have your data modelers, your report developers, and then your administrators. But when we start talking Fabric, this expands, right? I mean, I think that's pretty evident as we've talked about the added elements. So you still have the 4 roles. As we've changed it to data champion, because it doesn't just have to be somebody that has the skill sets within Power BI, right? It could be somebody that has maybe more of a data engineering background and skill sets within pipelines and warehouses. That could be those champions inside of the business groups. But then we add some new roles. We add a data architect. Really important when we go back to the architecture conversation that Greg kicked us off with, right? All these different options on kind of how we architect our solutions inside of Fabric. So really important to bring those people to the table when thinking about these bigger solutions. You've got your data engineers and you've got your data scientists, right? So like Raja kind of showed at the beginning with the experiences, right? There's a lot more roles that can come into the Fabric ecosystem to leverage it to its full capacity. And so I want to make sure we're identifying these people, who in our teams are these people, but also who in the business maybe are showing skill sets within these areas that can help evangelize and kind of build solutions on the business group level as well. So we wanted to kind of end the governance section just with some next steps, and you might be in different phases of these next steps, but important that you start to have the conversations around the delivery approach. What are the delivery approaches that you see most common? What were there maybe with Power BI, but do those approaches work in the same way now with all these Fabric items? And so start to begin to define those, where those dividing lines are. Like I talked about with the IT managed, where do you want people to have the freedom to build things? Where do things need to be a little bit more secured and go through a little bit more rigorous checks and balances? Next, you want to, like I talked on the last slide, really start to define those roles and responsibilities, right? Within your centralized IT teams, your BI teams, and within the business groups, right? So that you can get on the same page on kind of how to leverage these capabilities that you're already paying for. If you have a P SKU, or you're thinking about getting into the F SKUs, these capabilities are there, and you want to be able to leverage them, right? Next, that you have kind of a delivery approach or approaches, you have roles and responsibilities. You've started kind of drawing these dividing lines. Like we talked about starting off this section, it's about people and process, right? And so there's policies that need to be put in place. Some things can be managed through settings. Some things can't be managed all the way through settings. And so you want to make sure that everyone's on the same page on what are the policies within these delivery approaches. And then again, leverage those data champions within the business groups to bring them to the table, educate them, and make sure that best practices and these policies are being evangelized and followed out into the business groups. And you want to roll it out, right? So once you've kind of defined those policies, delivery approaches, you want to roll it out. You want to start educating those that are going to be able to leverage the creation of these Fabric items, like we talked about in their tenant settings. If you want to kind of start off slow, you do have control over who can create Fabric items. And so if you're at the point where, hey, we haven't really let people into the breadth of Fabric yet, but we've gone through these first 3 steps and we want to start rolling it out, you can begin to expand that, right? With the right communication, the right education, to get everybody on board on the best ways to use it. And lastly, monitoring, right? I won't spend too much time here. Raja spent a good amount of time talking about the monitoring capabilities inside of Fabric, the expanded options you have to monitor things, and even more coming, right? I think it's definitely on the roadmap that Microsoft has to continue to expand the monitoring capabilities for you to be able to see what's going on. And this will help you kind of track along with these policies and procedures and delivery approaches, getting the right kind of reporting in your hands to be able to see if things are being done according to plan, right? And so I think the next thing was a poll. I think it might have gotten kicked off at the beginning, so you may have already answered that. But I think if you now, after going through that section, kind of talking about it in a little more detail, if you want to throw maybe just into the chat kind of what delivery approach or approaches you feel like are being leveraged or you've already identified, or even comment if you haven't started having those conversations yet. You're not at that point of kind of drawing those lines. Feel free to just throw it in the meeting chat. It'd be great to kind of hear where everybody's at in this process. And so I think as those come in, I'll pass it back to Greg to move on into the secure section.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daniel. So as we start talking more about securing your data and making sure that you're comfortable with how it's secured, I want to start out with a slide that will hopefully define a few terms and provide a couple of recommendations. So I like to think about Fabric as having sort of a front door and a back door. The front door being how your users get in and access Microsoft Fabric, and then the back door being how it accesses data. So there's two main options for the front door of Fabric. The first one we would recommend, which is intra-conditional access. And if you're not familiar with that, think about it as being authentication-based but policy-driven. So for example, you can make sure that users can only authenticate after multi-factor authentication, or users can only authenticate from within a certain geography, like within the United States, or from a specific range of IP addresses. You could also make it device specific, where users are only allowed to authenticate if they're connecting from a managed, corporate-owned device that's been intuned and has been patched appropriately. So that's the recommended approach. It's authentication based, but it really has a lot of features that are almost network firewall-ish. There is another option, which is private endpoints. And if you want to force your users to connect over your express route and really lock it down, we've found that at least in terms of connecting to Power BI and Fabric, is less of a common option. One of the reasons is it does come with some limitations. So typically we recommend interconditional access. So that's the front door. And then let's talk about some options for the back door. If you have your data in Azure Data Lake storage and you're trying to expose it in one lake through a shortcut in your lakehouse, and if your Azure Data Lake store is really securely firewalled, then trusted workspace access is a feature that would allow you to trust one or all of your Fabric workspaces to bypass that firewall. Then similarly in data pipelines within Fabric, that trusted workspace access feature would allow them to access firewalled storage accounts. So next, if you're using Fabric notebooks and the Spark compute there needs to talk to other data and storage accounts that you have in Azure, then the managed private endpoint feature is the one that you'll want to look at. You'll notice that the private endpoints are the front door, and the managed private endpoints, managed VNet, is always the backdoor access to data. And then last option, if you're familiar with how Power BI accesses on-prem data through on-premises data gateway, then this will feel really familiar to you. Fabric has expanded that same gateway to also work for Data Factory pipelines running in Fabric. So I want to call out that is, I guess, really equivalent. If you're familiar with Azure Data Factory self-hosted integration runtime, this is the equivalent feature in Fabric. So Fabric and Power BI have this really rich honeycomb of features, and I want to talk through some of the key ones. So these first sets of features really apply equally to Power BI and Fabric, and then I'll mention a couple of new Fabric features in just a second. So if data residency is really a key security feature for your organization, then you're able to choose which Azure region your Fabric capacities run in. Admin log, the audit log, and the admin monitoring. So Raja demoed a bit of the admin monitoring, and then the audit log is a set of APIs that allow you to see You can see it in some of the admin monitoring reports, or you can also tap into the APIs and really get that database and store it to whatever retention you want. And so it allows you to see every activity that's going on inside of your Power BI/Fabric tenant. Similarly, there are APIs that allow you to extract a list of the contents of every workspace so that you really know what's in your Fabric tenant and can govern it appropriately. We mentioned conditional access on the previous slide, so I'll skip that. And then encryption at rest and in transit. So throughout the life cycle of your data, we want to make sure that it's secure and encrypted, and that comes out of the box in Fabric. Sensitivity labels and information protection is a really interesting and powerful feature. So you can tag a particular data element, and then that sort of tag, that sensitivity label, follows it all the way through its life cycle, all the way into the Power BI report. And then you can control what is able to be done with, say, your top secret data. So you can limit the ability to even show it on screen in a Teams meeting. You can, if it's exported to an Excel file from a Power BI report, and then someone emails that Excel file, a user that's not authorized to see top secret data won't even be able to open that Excel file. Really powerful feature. The granular access control really describes how you can grant users access to workspaces or even to individual Fabric items within a workspace. High availability and disaster recovery, HADR, is just built into the platform, so you can really rest assured that even if there is a tornado or some natural disaster, that your data is safe. Row and column level security. So really within a Power BI report semantic model, you're able to define exactly what data your users should see, whether it's which rows of data, which columns of data your users should see so that they see just the right information. So Microsoft Fabric and Power BI are really part of the larger Azure ecosystem, which has dozens of regulatory compliance certifications. And specifically around Fabric, it's got a number of regulatory compliance certifications. We can drop a chat into an IM into the chat. For example, it's HIPAA certified, and would encourage you to read about that if that's important to you. And then lastly, the kind of common features amongst Power BI and Fabric, you really have a lot of options in the tenant settings to adjust and make sure that you've enabled the features to the right set of users, and that the surface area of Fabric meets your security plans. There's also a couple of new Fabric-only features, trusted workspace access and managed private endpoints, that we described on the previous slide. And then want to call out the licensing implications of these. So those last two, trusted workspace access and managed private endpoints, both require an F64 or above. A P1 SKU and like Power BI Premium P1 will not do the trick for those. So for the sensitivity labels and information protection, that's a feature of Purview information protection. You'll need to look at that for licensing. And then for conditional access, that's actually an intra feature that requires a P1 or P2 license. Not to be confused with Power BI Premium P1, that's an intra P1 license. So I'll turn it back over to Daniel to kind of wrap it up.
Right. Yeah, so kind of breaking down the sections a little bit and some key takeaways. Raja kind of kicked us off with the Fabric overview. I think one of the key takeaways out of there is the direct link mode. I think that is a pretty significant game changer on what Fabric is bringing to the table. The ability to get data into a warehouse or a lake house, and then your reports automatically be updated, right? Seeing that data, not needing to leverage the refresh of an import model anymore, or the performance hit of a direct query model. And then he went into some of the monitoring that you have. So if you haven't looked into the monitoring hub or looked into admin monitoring, take a look at those, start to get familiar with the kind of information that those reports are providing you, and then certainly keep an eye out for enhancements and new reports coming from Microsoft when it comes to monitoring things. Then we talked manage. So here we kind of level set on the differences between our P SKUs and our F SKUs and the capacities. You know, a lot of similarities, right? As far as what you can do with your P SKUs today, just only a couple things that are slightly different. And then Greg went through those 4 quick wins. So definitely consider those when you're starting to think about how to start getting some quick wins out of Fabric. Those are some really good options there. Then on the govern side, we talked about the ability, you know, the importance of choosing your delivery method, right? And having those clear lines, understanding where you're using different approaches, how you're going to leverage them, what policies are going to go around them, and who are the people involved, right? The teams, the roles, the responsibilities when it comes to executing on those delivery approaches. And then we just went through Greg's section of secure and talked about a lot of rich security features that are already available to you in Power BI. So if you haven't been taking advantage of kind of all of those security features and functionalities, something like the intraconditional access, start to look into those. But then know there's a couple specific ones to the F64 Fabric SKU and above. So make sure to stay aware of those things. And then lastly, just a quick call to action. You know, really think, and we've seen a lot of success in the market with starting with a POC, right? There's a lot of these capabilities have been available to you, whether, you know, through Azure and those kind of things. So I think there's some familiarity with the technologies that are being leveraged, but then there's obviously some pretty significant enhancements to how all these things work together, and now all under the same hood. And so always great to start with a POC. You see some of our quick wins there that you might go prove out as a great starting point. And we're obviously here and happy to help along that journey, that Fabric journey. Like Greg mentioned at the beginning, we've been involved in the product all the way back from when it was in private preview, and so have a lot of familiarity already there. And then the other thing was just getting your team trained and certified. So I think Roger put some links to some things in the chat as well from a learning perspective. But then there's also a certification out there, the DP600. It's available to you. The Fabric Career Hub is a great place to go to for a learning track. And even at times there's some discounts there on the certification if you go through all the steps in that Career Hub. So a really great place to get your team trained up and start to learn more about the different Fabric elements. So lastly, before we turn over to Q&A, and I think we have some questions maybe unanswered in the chat that we can get to in the Q&A section, is if you could just type in the chat some different topics that you'd like to hear about on a future webinar. There's obviously a lot more than an hour and a half can cover when we think about Fabric and all the capabilities there and how to implement and different aspects of the product. And so feel free to throw in into the chat some ideas for future webinars. And I think with that, we wanted to open up, unless Raja, you had any closing comments, but we can open up to Q&A, maybe go through some of the chat ones. And then obviously if people want to just come on mute, off mute, we can use the raise your hand feature in Teams. It's a great way to kind of tee things up.
One question I see is, can we get this presentation? So yes, we will email out the slides. You'll get an email from Terry Smith, and we'll also email out a recording, which we'll post on our YouTube channel.
Thanks for covering that, Greg. We do have some questions that are in the chat. I think you guys have all done a great job of answering some of those as we went through. If anyone wanted to come off mute, you're welcome to ask a question. Kelly, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, my name is Kelly Yoon, and we started our POC, and we've got 2 models that we have deployed for reporting and separate lake houses. And, you know, we've done all the things on the one lake side to compact files, you know, the Parquet Delta files, do partitioning, but we find that the reporting still switches back to direct query mode instead of direct lake. Is there a real, it seems like it's very, I don't know what is preventing us from leveraging direct lake access versus direct query. Right?
Yeah,
Because it's a very simple star schema. We've just got essentially just a large volume of data. Like the compressed Parquet files is about 7 gigs, right? So
Yeah, let me show a link on the screen that really talks about some of the limitations that you need to be aware of. I'll drop it into the chat also,
okay, great, thanks.
so you can study it. Oops. I'll show this on the screen. So I think what you were describing is what's known as fallback in direct lake mode. So when any of these limitations are exceeded, then it falls back to executing SQL queries against the lakehouse or warehouse in direct query mode, which, as we know, is usually much slower. And so there's a couple of so you need to keep an eye on what size SKU, what size F capacity you've got. And then there's various different metrics. So like how many Parquet files are there per table, the number of row groups per table, and I can drop another link in the chat. I've written a LinkedIn post on how to see what that number is, number of rows per table. So you might see which of these limits you're bumping up against, and then maybe you can go from there. Maybe it's just scaling up, or maybe it's another limit to take a look at.
Because I was wondering, with that being default Delta Parquet as a storage, are there like do we have to look at clustering, those type of different more advanced techniques to try and drive out the queries to go into direct lake mode?
How are you writing your data? Are you
Right
using
now, it's
Spark?
just because it's a POC, it's just a manual using just a notebook. We just
Okay.
we pull it in. We from a Synapse environment actually, and we do a kind of a couple of things like just repartitioning the table so that the V order is enabled, and what's enabled by default. But then what we noticed is the first time we pulled it into Synapse, there was a lot of files created. So we said, okay, well, let's rerun a partition, a table copy essentially, and it just consolidate all those files, right? So now we essentially have one file for each week of data, say, right? And so we've reduced the file count that way, which is kind of a typical issue of the data lakes. It becomes a data swamp when there's too many files, right? And so the
Yeah.
files are say a half a gig, right? Optimal says the documentation says 1 gig should be but then partitioning, we see that as better because then we can go through an update of just new partitions. Like if we have 2 years worth of data, we're just updating the last 2 months, current and prior months, say, right? So we can have that type of strategy, right?
Yeah.
So
So I think you hit on a really important one there, which is that by default, when you're using any Fabric engine, it's using some proprietary compression techniques called V-ordering, which is still Parquet compatible, but it's using some of the intellectual property that Microsoft has from the VertiPack storage, sorting the data appropriately so that it compresses better. So you're getting that by default to kind of shrink the sizes. But if you're using notebooks and you want to use any other sort of Spark techniques like partitioning or Z-ordering or whatever, I don't know that I've got good numbers on that, but it may be worth testing to see if that impacts performance.
yeah, okay. But then there's also the concept of clustering. So we can cluster by, say, divisions or something like that, right? Which is not necessarily a true partitioning one. It's I got to read up more on that about what clustering versus partitioning is.
Yeah,
right? So
I
which
think
is the bucketing. That's essentially what it is. Sorry, yeah.
so my understanding, and then we'll move on to the next person who wants to ask a question. My understanding is that the way direct lake mode works is that as you need a particular column, like a measure queries a column, or you need to navigate a relationship, then it's going to read those individual columns into memory. And so I don't expect, so certainly a well-written table, not 30,000 files or whatever, is
Yeah.
going to help, but I think it's probably going to read all the data and across all your partitions to get that column that it needs, is my understanding.
Yeah, because a lot of our queries are, say, the last close week. We just want the data for that, and
Mm.
you get your measure, right? And so you just say, okay, well, just go to this partition and grab it, right?
Yeah.
But then it's just go, oh, geez, you know,
That-
I'm even trying to force it in Tabular Editor to force it to say just use direct link mode, and it says nope, not going to happen,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, I'm not aware that it's going to be able to read from just one partition in your Delta Lake
Yeah.
table, but that would be a
Yeah.
great feature, and it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the future that is a feature.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else have some questions? That was a great one. Thank you.
I think Venkat, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Hey, this is Venkat. Can you hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So Venkat from Albertsons. So now with this, like that we are moving the the premium licenses, Power BI premium licenses to the Azure portal, right? And what about the the other licenses that we have, like Power BI Pro license and the Power BI per user license, premium per user. So is there any plan for that also to the move to the Azure or something? Because we use the combination of both actually. Pro we use for development and premium for per capacity usage. So what's the roadmap for that actually?
Yes, great question, Venkat. I don't think, and I haven't heard anything that the pro licenses are going to be moving away. Pro licensing are, the difference there being is pro licenses assigned to a person, right? So
Yeah.
it's a per user license. And the premium was a capacity-based license, right? So at this point, I don't see a reason, or I don't see anything on the roadmap that says the pro license will be moving to an Azure site as well. I think it's just going to be the P SKUs.
Okay. So and a follow-up question on that one. So assume that we migrate all our a premium licenses to the in Azure, right? Then the today the premium will provide all the end users to have a free access to the reports, right? We can share that. How about that particular behavior? Assume that I have 13 capacities that I migrated everything to the Azure, right? How about that the free license access to our end user? Is it the Azure one also provide the same feature?
It's going to absolutely provide the same feature. You still have unlimited consumption through premium and through the fabric as well. So if you build a content and you post it in Power BI, if it's backed by fabric, if it's backed by premium, it's going to have the same. If the folks have access, they can consume it without needing any additional licenses.
So that means that means if you sign up for the let's assume we are starting a new tenant, right? So we only procure the Azure capacity, right?
Yeah.
That by default add all the free license as part of our Office 365 licensing and all, because the licensing will happen as part of Office 365, right? Where is that because today what's happened is we have a once a custom role created where by default whenever new user added to the company, the free license is assigned.
Free license sign. Okay.
So where is that happens? Is it assume that we are a brand tenant, right? A brand new tenant, right? I'm just signing up for that, right? And then I went there and I spin up the the Azure, right?
Yeah.
Where is that licenses? By default, that will be added to our Office 365 pool of licenses.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's going to remain the same. So in the Office 365, you either have free or you have pro licenses, right?
Yes, right.
Yes, I think that's going to remain the same. This is just your premium capacity. The compute is becoming more the FSKUs rather than the Power BI premium.
So the moment we spin up the the fabric capacities in the Azure, that will add that free license as part of Office 365 portal.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Just one clarification on the FSKUs is to get those free consumers of reports, it's an F64. So you can go below it now. But if you were on like an F2 through an F32, you have to have a pro license.
It's the same. It's the same in the a Power BI also, today also, right? Yeah. Only piece will provide that here.
Yeah. And I guess another call out would be to publishing reports still requires that Pro license, regardless
Mhm.
of capacities. And then also Power BI Premium per user does not get you any sort of Fabric features. So there are really small, like F2 capacities,
Mhm.
$100 and something dollars with reserved pricing, or like $260 pay as you go. So there's really economical ways to spin up Fabric capacities,
Yeah.
and no need for PPU to do Fabric.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. We don't use those. We only use a Pro versus this a premium. So Pro and premium. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to send you, Srikant, I see your chat. I'm going to send you, there's a blog that talks about end-to-end scenarios. So have a look at that. There have been some public case studies as well. But I think this is going to show you the end-to-end scenarios. You're asked for documentation or use cases. So let me send you that log.
Thanks, Raja. Looks like we have another hand raised, Greg. Do you want to come off mute?
Is that Ram Sharan?
Yeah. It looks,
Yes, Ram.
Just an extension question to the PSQs versus Fabric capacities, right? So we are in the planning phase of adopting the Fabric capacities because premium capacity is going to go away. So we are just exploring the documentation on the Fabric capacities. So if we were to adopt pay-as-you-go model, right? So is it more suitable for the front-end usage where you have a lot of interactive queries on the Power BI reports, or is it more suitable for other Fabric experiences such as your data warehouse loads or any other background operations? Because Microsoft did mention that if we go with pay-as-you-go model, we can switch off or turn off the capacity and there is no loads on it. So that's where the question arises. Is it pay-as-you-go model, is it more suitable for the front end or back end operations?
So I'll start, Greg, and then feel free to chime in, and Daniel. But Ramcharan, I think it depends, right? I mean, it depends on, especially on your consumption patterns on the front end. Let's talk about front end first, right? So if you have a very spiky pattern, right? So let's say you have a Monday morning spike of 100 plus users, and then the rest of the week and the rest of the month, your capacity is idle. Your pay as you go probably makes a lot more sense. But if you have more consistent pattern of consumption, then you might as well want to get some reserve capacity. And then you also have to think about the features that you're needing, are they available in kind of the SKU that you're looking for, right? So I think from a front end, it depends upon your consumption patterns. On the back end, same thing, right? The great thing about this is you can scale it up. So if you're running a workload once a week and you need to scale it up, right? You can scale it up to run that large refresh or that large workload, and then you can scale it down. So that's how I would think about it, but love to see Greg, Daniel, if you guys want to add anything to it.
Yeah, certainly pay-as-you-go small capacity for like a development environment, something that, or a learning environment is a great fit. When it's paused, you can't use it for anything. You can't render a report. You can't, query a warehouse or whatever. So just beware of that. But in a dev environment, you could automate it so that it's only running during business hours when your developers actually need to use it, and then maybe give them permission to start and stop the capacity if they need it outside of business hours.
But for production, it won't suitable, right? Because production capacities,
Right.
we have a loads across. Because I think Ram is also from my organization, but Ram question is more like we are thinking, right? Because during the night hours, we don't see majority of front end consumption, right? Night hours or morning typical our morning 1 a.m. to morning 4 a.m. like a typical our loads data loads run. But after that a 4 a.m. and all, there are consumption will start, right? Actually, end user interaction. We are only talking about a Power BI here. We don't have like in any other Fabric items yet. In those scenarios, right? We are just thinking like if you can reduce that consumption in the night hours, because we only have a data refreshers are running, right? All background operations. And then we'll scale it, maybe if you see that, F's right, reduce it to F, maybe 64 or something. And then during the daytime, we can reduce to the 128 or something, right? So is that kind of a suggestible option or something to, in order to avoid the cost, right? All our plan is to avoid the cost, right? More paying.
Yeah, I would certainly monitor the capacity metrics app and see how your usage is stacking up against that. There's some really interesting things you'll see in there, like, for example, certain types of operations are background operations and don't really spike the CPU usage of your capacity right that moment. So, for example, semantic model refreshes get spread over the next 24 hours. So I would just monitor the capacity metrics app, and then scaling certainly might be an option that you could consider.
Yeah, and Venkat and Ramcharan, I think the way I'm thinking about this is, when you were doing Power BI Premium, you're always thinking about the worst case scenario, right? So you gotta get a big P3 because you gotta scale up for that Monday, right? So in when you're planning for Fabric, and I know there's some things that are still in preview and you're gonna see this come in. When you're planning for Fabric, I would plan for more of an average use case for a reserved instance, right? So, and then it gives you that ability to scale up hourly in the pay as you go. So that's how I'm thinking about it right now. But, again, if you're just using Power BI and you have idle time, yeah, I think you have an opportunity to scale it down or pause it, which is, you could do that. Or you can use that idle capacity for, maybe data processing workload. If you're thinking about cost saving, right, that's an opportunity as well, where you have idle time, you can use the same compute for some data processing workloads that yesterday, or a few months ago before Fabric, you wouldn't be able to do any data processing, right, with the same premium compute. But now you
we
can.
used to rely on the auto scales and all the stuff, which is more costly affair than this.
Yeah, this is hourly scaling. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And we are planning to introduce the Copilot features and all the stuff, all the advanced features, AI and Gen AI. And that's where we are just doing the again re-estimating the capacity, how much the Copilot is going to cost and all. And one of the suggestion from our Microsoft counterpart provided maybe pay as you go an option, but I'm not convinced about their statement of that, because I literally because all our productions throughout the night and all, but there is some suggestion, instead of pausing, right, you can scale up and scale down, right? Scale up and scale down. That is something more I'm kind of leaning towards. Maybe in the night hours I can reduce to the lower capacity and all. But
And you might do a reservation for like an F64, and then if you need to scale up on Monday mornings to F128, then that additional compute would be just pay as you go. So
exactly, that's what we are just thinking towards.
Great question. Any other questions?
One just came in, Greg. Do you have any tools templates available to calculate the capacity planning in order to understand the billing?
Is that question
very interesting? Very
is that
interesting
question about basically planning out, estimating what the cost is likely to be before it's built? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, Raja, is the capacity planning tool available generally, or is that just something that's been held pretty close to the vest?
I have to check back on that one. Shurikan, I work with this team, so I know Shurikan teams. I don't think that we have something that is very conclusive that you can say, okay, there's a calculator or something like that that can help you with planning. There is a couple of things that I can think about, but let me check on that one and see what is available or something coming. I think I haven't seen something. I mean, what we've relied on is, it's really POCs, because the problem we run into with any kind of calculators or capacity planning tools is, these are capacity compute-based resources, and they're not per person or per query assigned. So, a lot of time, if you tell me, hey, I have 500 people or 50 reports, the complexity of their reports, the concurrency of those users can have a big impact, right? So it's been a challenge to do capacity planning without really digging into the use case and understanding it a little bit deeper. But let me see if there's any latest guidance on a calculator or a capacity planning tool that I can send you.
Yeah, Raja, just want to add one feedback on that one. That's a really pain point, even many organizations are facing, and Microsoft really need to do a better job there, because
Yeah.
many times what happens, business head reach out to us saying that I have certain project, how much is the budget. That right now the strategy that we are taking is hey, based on the some estimations and all, we always prefer the incremental, but they need to reserve the budget, right? They need to reserve the budget.
Yeah.
They need to do the all the capex and opex stuff, right? That's where we are we tell them hey, in the mid of the year it's gonna increase. That's gonna really a problematic one for many organizations and all.
Yeah. Understand.
Thank
And especially this is a big change coming from, hey, you bought it and now your bill could be variable because you go into pay as you go model. So capacity planning become a lot more important. So great point, guys. I've taken a note. Maybe this is one of the sessions, Greg, we can do on one of our webinars. Show talk about what does capacity planning in Fabric mean.
I took that same note, Raja.
Awesome.
Sounds like a good next step.
We had a similar problem whenever we were using the Databricks platform. There we were unable to find the exact capacity planning to reduce our sizing and as well as scale up. Okay, there was a fat bill which came out. In order to understand this properly, that would be the best way to get the tool.
you. If nobody has any other questions, I may, because I really don't want to take all the Q&A sessions for us, but I don't see anyone is asking any other questions, but
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So one of the the pain points what we are thinking, what we are doing is getting off the backend semantic model data actually, right? I know Microsoft has certain plans, but I'll tell you one use case, right? Today, we have we are migrating from a Snowflake environment to the Google GCP, right? And I got a question from many time from the senior leadership team. Hey, can you give me the list of the reports that are connecting to the Snowflake? I can get that. But the next question they're asking is, right? I think maybe Greg and Daniel, this kind of scenarios may come to you as well, right? Now the next question asking, okay, what are the objects that these reports are connecting, right? So that they can plan it's a big migration, right? It's a 6 months to 8 months to 1 year project, right? And they want to go by the phases. Today with the the tools or the details available, we could not able to get okay, a report is connected to the what database object. We are running some APIs, but that is only giving a 30% of a data, right? The scanner APIs and all. If you have the custom queries or if they're using a different options, it's absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy, but what I would
Exactly.
suggest is there's APIs called the metadata scanning APIs, which basically tell you everything in all of your workspaces in your tenant. If you turn on an advanced option in the tenant settings, that then it can also expose every single Power Query in those semantic models, and then you'll have to parse that out. Hopefully, it'll be predictable looking.
Then
I need to,
then I need to pay another 60K or something for that additional, the all the this analytical analysis server logs and all. Yeah, I think that's another point, frequently, right? Because people change the the solutions of the a database, right? We have DB systems migrated from one system to another system and all, especially for data warehousing systems, right? In this changing world, that's a really painful point. And the scanner APIs are providing some details, but it's just 30%, as I said, right? If you have a custom query, that's it, it's blocking, right? And if your report has a multiple other a combination of a custom queries versus direct accessing of a table, it's not providing any of the details, right? So
yeah, certainly parsing out the big JSON file that lists all the semantic models and all the Power Queries in them is not trivial, but that should have the information that you need. But it may be a little bit of work to kind of parse it out and figure out which semantic model pulls from which tables in Snowflake.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, we are 2 minutes over time. If anyone has any additional questions, you can send them over to us. I'm going to put Terry's email address and the Lantern website in the chat here at the end. Feel free to contact us. And thank you all so much for your time. We will be sending out the recording and the deck from today's session.
Thank you. Thank you, Raja, Daniel, and Greg. Great session. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.